Can you hear me if I walk over here?
Yep.
Right, so I've got the brochure from the trip that I did. Does it say what the cost was?
Ruth Jackson still has the brochure from her 1989 OE bus tour across Europe.
Look, I've written on it. New Zealand 4,000 including food. So we did Paris, Cognac, San Sebastian, Madrid, Toledo, Barcelona, Avignon, Antibes, Monte Carlo, Pisa.
How would you define an OE?
Um,
Hugo Stewart has just spent 2 months traveling through Southeast Asia to kick off his OE, and now he's on the line from London.
the immediate thing that comes to mind is living in another place, not traveling. I think for me, the finish line for knowing that I've made it and the OE has begun in London is when I have a local pub that I know, and I've got an area that is my local area, and you really begin to get to know and meet and make true friends and long-term relationships.
Here, Dubrovnik, splits at Venice, Club Habitat, that's in Vienna, Salzburg, Munich, Neuschwanstein, Lucerne, Lauterbrunnen, Heidelberg, St. Goa, Amsterdam, Bruges, London.
Amazing. Wow.
There were 13 of us, I think, on that tour. I'm still Facebook friends and in touch with 7 of them.
Wow, cool.
That was 1989, so over 30 years ago.
The Great Kiwi OE. For any foreigners like me, that's an overseas experience. I'm Gwen McClure, and today on The Detail, we're looking at how this generation's OE is different from those in the past. Young Kiwis are still leaving the country, in fact, in record numbers. But for this generation, the traditional haunt of England is not what it once was.
I think there's no doubt that the economy has been stagnating over the past 2 years since the Bank of England has been ratcheting up interest rates to cope with inflation to help bring it down.
And so travelers are venturing beyond the classic destinations. Then again, some things never change. Here's Hugo.
I'm just at a friend's place. I've got a friend who's living in Fulham and has a spare couch that I can stay on for a couple nights.
So kind of just turned up with a couch to stay on, but no kind of plan for where to live or anything.
Yeah, no, I think what I've heard is that it's really hard to lock in accommodation before you have employment. And if you try to sign on to flats, you have to pay huge amounts of 3-4 months rent up front if you can't prove that you have a salary. There's just no way that I can afford to upfront thousands and thousands of pounds for accommodation when I don't even have any guarantee that I'll have work.
Yeah, especially with that New Zealand dollar compared to the pound.
Oh, yeah. Converting it over is not a fun time. It's like dividing it by 2 and more.
So what are you thinking for work?
I don't feel I can be too picky. I have got a bit of a network of people that I can reach out to for work, and I am luckily in an area of work with being in the production space where I can pick up little bits of, I can work on a job here and there. And so I'm hoping to piece things together.
For those listening to this, we work together. You were at Newsroom working as a journalist, but your background is sort of more in film production. Is that right?
I was in, commercial video production.
So do you think you're going to stay in that space generally, or would you go work in a pub or do kind of anything that landed in your lap?
I guess I have 2 feelings about that. One is that the thing that's exciting about London is the opportunity to engage in work that wouldn't be possible in New Zealand and build careers and experience that goes beyond what the smaller scale of New Zealand has. So I feel like working in a pub doesn't fulfill that. Maybe that's me being a bit too starry-eyed about the opportunities of overseas. But I think the other side of it as well is that with the cost of living in London at the moment, it's pretty hard to pour pints and pay rent.
Yeah.
There are real compromises there. And I've had friends that have done that, come over and worked hospitality or retail and done it for 6 months and gone, it's too stressful, it's too hard, I'm barely staying afloat, I'm moving up to Manchester or I'm moving home. So I think that idea of coming over and pouring pints and having a great time and traveling Europe, I'm sure people do it. I'm sure it's possible, but I think it's maybe a thing that's slightly less common now.
Yeah, it's been changing quite a bit recently. The good old London OE, and people going there for a couple of years and staying for longer if anything happened. It's kind of switching, and it's switched over the last couple of years for Australia.
This is David Lassier. He's a director at recruitment agency Robert Walters. And yes, there is some irony in an American interviewing a Frenchman about the Kiwi OE.
I feel like the newer generation is going on long holidays in Europe, traveling, discovering, seeing how it works over there, and then coming back home. But because of the market condition and the way it is at the moment in New Zealand, they're kind of like, well, actually, Australia is good. It's nicer weather, better pay, more jobs, and still close to home.
You think that's since COVID or?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, since COVID. I think people didn't really live that much just after COVID because the market conditions were quite good here in New Zealand, and you still be able to get a good job, get a good pay, get good career progressions and career opportunities. So they stayed in New Zealand, and now the market has turned. They're like, well, actually, let's go into OE. At the moment, it's quite funny because you don't actually get a job that easily because the market conditions are not that easy or great over there as well. So I've heard people, so I've had like an ex-colleague from my previous job at Deloitte, and I was saying like, yeah, I'm kind of looking for work in London and trying to secure something before moving. And they've been looking for 5 or 6 months.
Wow.
So it's not that easy. When you're there, it's probably a bit easier. But the average of finding a job in London at the moment is 4 to 6 months.
Was that the same 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
No, you get a job straight away.
Wow.
Like the 5 or 10 years before COVID, it was a little bit of, if you get to London, your time off depended on how long it takes you to meet a recruiter. So if you don't want to get a job, don't meet a recruiter. You'll be fine. As soon as you met one, you'll be like, get called and get interviews and get a job.
Wow.
So now it takes a little bit longer.
That seems to be what Hugo and his friends have found in London.
So I have some friends that are thriving. I think friends in the corporate space seem to be doing a lot better. You know, I've got mates that found jobs at British Airways and at big accounting firms and all that. And, you know, they seem to be doing well. I have some friends that are working in more like startup spaces, and obviously that's like a different dynamic, but they seem like, I think that's a bit more rocky, but seems pretty good. And then I was actually catching up with lunch with 2 friends that work in the film industry, and they came from Auckland. They're very successful. One of them's a film editor, one of them's a sound recordist. They had successful careers in Auckland, and they'd heard that England and London was a growing industry. Catching up with them at lunch today, they said London has gone from, I think the numbers they quoted were 90 active productions, like major productions, down to 20 major productions this year. And the dream of London hasn't been fulfilled, and they're having to look back and go, hey, actually, the Auckland film industry, there's a lot going on there. Maybe we need to go back home, which is a bit sad. But yeah, I think there have definitely been a few people I've talked to that have bounced off of London just from a job opportunity point of view. I think the idea of London being the only destination is something that I've noticed evolving. London is a wonderful city. I've had the best time here, and I can see the appeal, and it's still, I think, going to be the primary destination. But I have so many friends that are like, why would I go to London when Amsterdam is right there? Or when Berlin is there? Or when Vancouver is there? And so I think that more of my friends, in a way that I wasn't expecting, are looking at a broader range of global cities to provide that OE experience, rather than it just being, hey, I'm going to go get a flat in Clapham in South London and, you know, do the same thing that Kiwis for generations have done, you know?
Let's go back to Ruth Jackson, who did her OE in London in 1989.
So I ended up doing admin work, but it was actually quite interesting. I was PA to a professor of psychiatry at one of London's biggest teaching hospitals. Yeah, so I did a few little odd bits and bobs. You know, you sign up with a temping agency. A lot of people work in pubs because it's easy to get, you know, you'd go temping. It's easy to get time off and just go on your travels. You save up a bit of money, you go off travelling, save up a bit of money, go off again. This was sort of 89 to 91. So not everywhere had computers at the time. So I learned to use a computer while I was at the hospital.
So you hadn't been using one in New Zealand at that point?
No.
Okay.
No, at that point, we were still back in the dark ages of if your office had computers, then there was a specially air conditioned room with specialist operating. There was a raised floor for all the cables and had to be kept at a constant temperature because otherwise the computers might do something stupid or, yeah, it was a big deal.
Headhunter David Lassier says a lot of Kiwis now end up in Australia doing
a bit of everything. It's kind of like it's super open. Like there's people going in tradies, but like there's a lot of nurse as well going there. But there's people in consulting, in finance, in tech, anything.
Do you feel like New Zealanders are seen as kind of a skilled workforce in Australia, or how are they treated?
I'm not too sure yet about Australia because it's still quite new. But I know in the UK it's definitely like a very well looked after workforce. We've got an office in London because we're from the UK. And at some stage, Robert was the biggest employer of Kiwis.
Wow.
Placing them in contract roles around London because it's so many of them and they're always well looked after. Like if you've got a Kiwi who's an accountant going in London, they'll be like, yeah, we know they're going to be good workers. They're going to work hard. They will do what they needs to be done. So they've got, Kiwi's got a good reputation in the world. And I think there's no reason why it would not be the same in Australia.
Why do you think that is? Is it our education or is it like a cultural thing that Kiwis are hard workers? Why is it?
Not being Kiwi, obviously, and coming here and seeing how it is. I think there's something around the relationship building, the hard working. There's something around that. And just being like good people to be around. I think that's what people are looking for nowadays, especially when you go in businesses that, you recruit for the skill set, but you also recruit for the team fit.
Okay.
And I think that's what Kiwis would have. Like you go in there and meet any Kiwis, they're all nice and super easy to talk to. And you're like, yeah, I can definitely see you work with anyone.
Where else are you placing people around Europe?
It's funny because like at the moment we're seeing people going to Netherlands, Amsterdam is where we see a few of them going from New Zealand, the Kiwis. So because most of it is in English. So it's English speaking, so people are not scared. They've got a lot of head office over there, European head office in Amsterdam. So we're seeing a few of them going there.
Okay, and what about the US? Do you put people over there much?
There's not as much, and I think the reason is just getting the visa there. We're seeing people working for US businesses from New Zealand. So in tech and transformation, we see quite a bit of that. So we're starting to see getting massive pay rise. Like, when the salary was going up, last year, a couple of years ago, people were getting an extra like 50 or 60K to go and work for the US from home. Okay. Now things have kind of slowed down and not as much, but there was a bit of that as well in the US.
Is that new since COVID, this idea of remote work?
Definitely. Like the remote working is definitely new.
Are there any specific jobs or skill sets that New Zealanders are really known to be great at?
There's definitely finance. I think the tech side, we're starting to get a good name. There's a lot of like tech startups that are doing very well. And that's a very well looked after skill set at the moment, being Australia or the UK.
And what about stuff like nursing or medicine? Can you just pop over to London?
Yeah, I think that part is, I'm not an expert in that, but like if you do any research, the top skills needed in Australia or the UK, nursing is always the first one.
You're probably dealing with people kind of in the 25 to 30 range a lot, right? Yeah. So what about a 21-year-old who just wants to go and move to London? I mean, are people going as baristas and
so much work in hospitality. Yeah, there's still a lot of work in hospitalities. And those guys are tending to travel more around Europe. They don't just stay in London.
Right.
I think the people moving to London move there for a career. So they've got a job. They want to keep going in their career and keep growing so that when they come back to New Zealand, they can have an even better job. The younger guys, they might go in the south of France and work in super yachts. They might go in Spain and work in bars, in Italy, do a bit more traveling, work along the way. I think that's what they're doing more.
So I think for me, the difference between like a travel trip and an OE, it's the work and the being settled and those like longer term relationships you make with both the people in your community and with your career as well.
From what you're saying, though, it sounds like you have seen this experience, and a lot of your friends have as well, not so much as a kind of a break from adult life, but as part of your life plan and career plan to advance your career.
I think so. And like, obviously, I think that I would say the two main things that drive moves to London are its proximity to Europe and travel and new experiences and new cultures. That's still a massive thing. That's still a massive draw card. for me coming to London is the ability to jump on a, 10 quid Ryanair flight to Spain. That I can't complain about that. But I do think that career progression, just personally, and I know for a lot of my friends, is a big thing. It's a bigger economy. There's twice as many people in London as there is in the whole of New Zealand.
Wow.
And so for me, I'm trying to think about like there's got to be some more exciting ideas and more space, and then hopefully bring that experience back to New Zealand when the time comes.
How long did you work in New Zealand before you went to London?
About 4 years, so just slightly under 4 years.
Okay.
I think the idea of going over it with 1 year's experience or 2 years experience, I think a lot of my friends have gone, that suddenly seems a lot scarier than it did 10 years ago. Maybe going over with 4 or 5 years in a slightly more senior job title is a bit of a safety net when you come over here.
Why do you think that is, that it was easier to do that 10 years ago?
Well, I think there are simple things you can point to, like the easiest, most obvious thing to point to in terms of the cost increase is the cost of visas. And obviously that's a one-time cost at the beginning of the trip, so that's not necessarily indicative of all costs. But in 2015, you didn't have to pay anything for the NHS levy. They introduced some nominal fees there. It was up to, by the beginning of this year, it was up to a few £100. And then in February this year, it jumped to over £1,000
Wow.
for all but youth mobility visas. And that's £1,000 per year of your visa. So I was originally going to get an ancestry visa because I have grandparents in the UK. It was going to cost me a little under £6,000 to get my visa sorted. So I ended up moving to a youth mobility visa, which ended up being just around that £1,500 mark for 2 years, which is still a chunk of change. And when I compare that to my older sister who came to London, she's 8 years older than me, those costs just didn't exist. I don't think I want to imply that it was so easy for people a few years ago, but I do think COVID has made an impact on that. I do think one thing that has maybe helped is that I know a lot of my friends in London work remote or work partially remote or have much more flexible work lives.
Did you guys save for quite a while for this?
Yeah. When you're going over, you don't really know how much you need. And you talk to some people and they're like, oh, I wouldn't go over unless I had at least $30,000. And then you talk to other people and they go, $30,000, that's crazy. You only need 15. I was planning to do a short bit of travel on my way over. So I kind of had to account for that within my savings. But it was definitely a focus for a few years before going, was just making sure you have that landing pad. Because I had one particular conversation with a friend that said, I think it took them 7.5 months to find solid employment in London. And I heard that and went, man, well, I don't know if I'll be able to buy myself 7.5 months of London runway, but I want to buy as much runway as I can get.
But what about if your OE is all travel, no work? Journalist Delphine Herbert and her partner have just come back from a 7-month trip around Asia and Europe.
In terms of actual spending money for that 7th month trip, bearing in mind that we weren't fully doing it rough the whole time, we weren't always staying in hostels, we were staying in nicer places. In terms of spending money, we went away with 50k between us, and then we obviously had savings to come home to, and then I think honestly on top of that, all of the flights and bags and insurance and injections, because you got to think about that as well. Injections can cost $1,000.
Wow.
I think maybe our total spend was close to 65 to 70k.
When I went traveling, probably I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, we carried around that massive Lonely Planet in our backpack. Where were you getting your information?
So we just watched travel YouTube videos. I'm talking, I want to say hundreds. I wouldn't even be surprised if we watched thousands. From the moment we booked the trip, it was essentially every other night we spent 1 to 2 hours figuring out where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do. And obviously it turned out that we didn't go to a lot of the places that we ended up looking at, but it's quite good. I liked watching the vlogs of just real people randomly walking around.
Did you also just have your phones with you the whole time and you're able to look stuff up the whole way?
Oh, yeah. There was definitely days where we would just get on a train and be like, okay, let's just go to this town and we'll just walk there and see what happens, or, you know, would type in our phones good attractions or good things to do near me, you know, if we were in the area. So I think that's changed in the sense that we had the luxury of just looking things up and having things at the click of a button, whereas I guess maybe when my parents were travelling, you know, cell phones weren't really a thing.
What about communication? How often were you in touch with your family back home?
I would say maybe once every few days officially. Like I actually, which I've never done before, was my mum got my location setting. So on the iPhones, we just did the Find My Friends. And so I set that up with my mum, my dad and my brother, and so they basically just knew where I was at all times, which kind of helped. And then mum would do like maybe a daily Snapchat, just being like, just saw you've got flown into Thailand, or just seen that you've arrived at your location. So that was kind of the way we stayed in touch, as mum just essentially tracked me about where I was in the world, and then, you know, occasional check-in.
Oh, crikey.
That's Ruth Jackson's response when I asked her how much she saved for her OE back in 1989.
For some reason, $1,000 springs to mind.
So when you were over there, how often did you talk to your family back home, and how did you do that?
So mum and dad would ring every week or two. They had a habit of sitting down every Sunday after lunch. Each of them would write me a letter. And they got to the point where they stopped conferring about what they were going to write about, because then the other one would say, there's nothing left for me. So I got 2 letters a week, one from each parent. I still have them in a folder. I was not nearly so good about actually writing back, which is why they phoned me every couple of weeks, because I never wrote them back. No, there was no internet, there was no email. Telegrams was a stupid idea.
I think a lot of people listening wouldn't even know what a telegram is.
Oh, okay. So telegram is, I guess, like the old school version of a text or an SMS, where you would go to the post office and they would charge you for every word that you sent, and it would basically, but they would electronically send it across the world by what we thought at that time was absolute juju magic. Didn't understand it, sort of thing. And then a telegraph operator at the other end would write it out, and someone would deliver it to your door. And it was like fast by those standards. You got a telegram in a day, where a letter could take a week, but they were really expensive.
That's it for this week. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Ruth Jackson, Hugo Stewart, David Lassier, and Delphine Herbert. This episode was engineered by Jeremy Ansell and produced by Alexi Russell and Sharon Brett Kelly. I'm Gwen McClure, Matewa.